Skies over Middle-earth darkened unnaturally, heavy with the weight of a growing power. Deep within the darkened halls of Barad-dûr, the eye of Sauron blazed with renewed intensity. A ripple had passed through the fabric of Middle-earth, disrupting the delicate balance of its ancient magic. Sauron's deep, commanding voice echoed through his fortress as he addressed his loyal lieutenant. "The relic," Sauron hissed. "It has awakened." A servant of Sauron, clad in black armor, approached the pedestal where a dark, glowing orb rested. The artifact pulsed with an otherworldly light, its energy radiating a force unlike anything Middle-earth had ever known. Sauron's essence coiled around it, his unseen form feeding on its power. "With this," Sauron murmured, "I will bring the end of the free peoples of Middle-earth." And something else approaches. He paused, feeling a faint disturbance. A power from beyond this world. On Earth, in the aftermath of Avengers Endgame, the Avengers were finally piecing their lives back together. Sam Wilson, the new Captain America, stood on the balcony of Avengers Tower, watching the city below. It was quiet, a rare moment of peace. Behind him, Thor entered the room holding a massive turkey leg he'd been snacking on. "What troubles you, Captain?" Thor asked, his voice light-hearted but curious. "Nothing," Sam said, glancing back. "Just enjoying the calm." The calm didn't last. An alarm blared across the tower as a rift opened in the sky, its edges crackling with blinding energy. Within moments, the team was on high alert. Spider-Man swung into the room, his mask half on, holding a slice of pizza. Guys? Please tell me that's a fireworks show, and not another multiverse thing." Bruce Banner appeared next, his glasses perched precariously on his nose as he studied the readings on a holographic display. "This is not good. That rift isn't just a portal, it's collapsing dimensions." Thor gripped Mjolnir tightly, his expression growing serious. "I've seen such tears before. They are not easily mended." Scarlet Witch entered, her hands glowing faintly with red energy. "It's not from our world. The magic feels ancient." Before anyone could respond, the rift expanded, engulfing the room in a flash of blinding light. The Avengers barely had time to react before they were pulled into its depths, their bodies spinning through an endless void of color and energy. For what felt like an eternity, they were weightless, lost in a swirling chaos of dimensions colliding. When the light finally faded, the Avengers found themselves sprawled across a grassy field, the air thick with the smell of earth and smoke. The landscape was unlike anything they had ever seen. Rolling hills, jagged mountains in the distance, and an ominous tower silhouetted against the horizon. "Where are we?" Sam asked, picking himself up and dusting off his uniform. Thor scanned the area, his eyes narrowing. "This is not Asgard, nor is it Midgard, but the air, the magic here feels alive." Spider-Man swung to his feet, his voice tinged with nervous energy. "Okay, so we're definitely not in New York anymore. Is this one of those alternate dimensions? Like the multiverse thing with Mysterio?" Bruce adjusted his glasses, glancing at a scanner on his wrist. "We're not just in another dimension. We're in a completely different reality, one with its own rules, and its own dangers." A horn sounded in the distance, deep and mournful. The Avengers turned as a group of riders emerged from a nearby forest, their armor gleaming in the sunlight. At their head was Aragorn, his sword drawn and his piercing gaze fixed on the strange newcomers. "They don't look like orcs," Legolas said, his bow drawn and ready. "But their appearance is unusual." "Dwarves don't dress like that," Gimli muttered, hefting his axe. "And I've never seen armor like theirs." Aragorn raised a hand, signaling his companions to halt. "Who are you?" he called out. "And why have you come to Middle-earth?" Sam stepped forward cautiously, his shield slung over his back. "We don't mean any harm. We're not from around here." Gandalf, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, his staff glowing faintly. His piercing gaze swept over the Avengers, lingering on Scarlet Witch and Thor. "They carry a power I do not recognize," Gandalf said, "but it is not evil." Thor stepped forward, towering over the Fellowship. "I am Thor, son of Odin, Prince of Asgard. We have come here by accident through a tear in the realms." Gimli snorted. "Sounds like a load of troll dung." "Quiet," Aragorn said sharply. He studied the Avengers carefully before sheathing his sword. "If what you say is true, then you may have come at a most dire time." The Fellowship exchanged uneasy glances as Gandalf explained the rising power of Sauron and the threat to Middle-earth. The Avengers listened intently, their expressions growing grim as they realized the magnitude of the danger. Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened. "This Sauron sounds like a foe worth defeating." Gandalf nodded. "Indeed, and if you are to stay in this world, you will need to fight." Scarlet Witch glanced at Gandalf, sensing the weight of his power. "We'll fight," she said firmly, "but we'll need to understand this world first." Aragorn extended his hand toward Sam, his expression resolute. "Then let us face this darkness together." The Fellowship and the Avengers stood facing each other in an uneasy silence. The wind whistled through the field as both groups sized each other up, their instincts honed by years of battle. Thor rested Mjolnir on his shoulder, his gaze flicking to Legolas, whose bow remained drawn. "You might lower that," Thor said. "If I meant you harm, you'd already know it." Legolas didn't move. Aragorn, ever the diplomat, gestured for calm. Legolas stand down. The elf reluctantly lowered his bow, though his sharp eyes never left Thor. Aragorn turned his attention back to the newcomers. "You said you came here by accident. Through what means?" Sam Wilson, the new Captain America, stepped forward. A rift, a tear between dimensions. "We've seen things like this before, but this one's different, stronger." Gandalf's brow furrowed, his staff glowing faintly as he studied the Avengers. "The magic surrounding you is unlike anything I have encountered. It is not of Middle-earth, yet it is potent." Scarlet Witch felt the weight of Gandalf's gaze and took a tentative step forward. "You can sense it too, can't you?" she said softly. "The imbalance, this world, it's tied to ours now." Gandalf nodded gravely. "Sauron's influence has grown stronger. He seeks dominion over all free peoples, and if your presence here is linked to him, then his power may be greater than we feared." The Fellowship exchanged uneasy glances. Gimli muttered under his breath, "Great," as if orcs and wargs weren't bad enough. Aragorn stepped forward, his piercing gaze locking onto Sam. "If you are warriors, then your strength will be needed. Sauron's armies march even now." "Hold up," Spider-Man interrupted, raising his hands. "Did you just say armies? Like actual armies? Do you guys have tanks or anything?" "Tanks?" Legolas asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "What are tanks?" "Forget I asked," Spider-Man said, shaking his head. Thor turned to Aragorn. "I have faced armies before, mortal. Tell us where the foe lies and we shall break them." "It's not that simple," Gandalf interjected. "Sauron's forces are vast, and his magic is insidious. He wields a power that can corrupt even the strongest of wills." Scarlet Witch stiffened at the mention of corruption. She cast her gaze downward, remembering her own struggles with the chaos magic that coursed through her veins. "What exactly are we dealing with?" she asked. "Sauron's armies are gathering at Isengard and beyond," Gandalf said. "Orcs, trolls, and worse creatures born of dark sorcery. but his power lies in his relics, artifacts tied to his essence. Bruce Banner, who had been quietly analyzing their surroundings, adjusted his glasses. If he's using artifacts to enhance his power, then we need to target those, destroy them. Gimli snorted. Easier said than done, stranger. Sauron's relics are not so easily destroyed. Gandalf raised a hand. He is correct, but there may be a way. The relic that drew you here, if it is linked to Sauron, then it may also be his weakness. Thor gripped Mjolnir tightly. Then let us seek this relic and end this madness. Aragorn inclined his head. The relic lies in Barad-dûr, within the heart of Sauron's stronghold. But to reach it, we must first survive his armies. As the two groups traveled together toward Rohan, the cultural differences between the Fellowship and the Avengers became evident. Thor and Gimli bonded quickly, sharing tales of their respective homes over a roaring campfire. "Aye," Gimli said, holding up a mug of ale. "Asgard sounds like a fine place, almost as grand as the halls of my fathers." Thor chuckled, raising his own mug. "A fine compliment from one so stout. You would be welcome among the warriors of Asgard." Legolas, however, was less impressed by the newcomers. He kept his distance, his sharp eyes always watching. Spider-Man noticed and swung into the elf's path. "So, do you ever smile? Or is brooding your whole thing?" Legolas arched an eyebrow. "You are quick, but your flippancy will not serve you in battle." "Noted," Spider-Man said, swinging away with a grin. Meanwhile, Scarlet Witch and Gandalf walked together at the rear of the group. "Your magic is unlike anything I've seen," Gandalf said. "It is both light and dark." Wanda nodded. "It's complicated. Sometimes it feels like it's trying to control me." "The same could be said of all power," Gandalf said. "But it is not the power that defines you. It is how you wield it." The journey to Rohan was long and arduous, with Sauron's influence growing stronger the closer they got to the kingdom. Along the way, the group encountered small bands of orcs, which the Avengers dispatched with relative ease. Thor's lightning cut through the enemy ranks like a scythe, while Hulk barreled through the battlefield, scattering orcs like leaves. The Fellowship watched in awe as the Avengers demonstrated their unique abilities. Aragorn, however, remained cautious. "They fight well," he said to Legolas, "but their power is unlike anything I've seen. It could be as dangerous as it is helpful." "Do you not trust them?" Legolas asked. "I trust their intent," Aragorn replied. "But power like that, it changes people." The group finally arrived in Rohan, where King Theoden and his people were preparing for an attack on Helm's Deep. The Avengers and the Fellowship gathered in the King's Hall, where they shared what they had learned. "Sauron's forces will be upon us soon," Aragorn said. "We must prepare." Sam Wilson stepped forward. "Then let's fight, together." Theoden hesitated, his gaze lingering on the Avengers. "You are not of this world. Why would you risk your lives for our people?" Sam met his gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do." Thor stepped forward, Mjolnir in hand. "Your enemy is mine, and together we shall bring him to his knees." The Fellowship and the Avengers began to strategize, their bond growing stronger as they prepared for the battle to come. The rift between realms had brought them together, and now they would face the darkness as one. The air over Middle-earth grew heavier with each passing day. The signs of Sauron's growing power were impossible to ignore. The skies above Rohan darkened, and a strange, unnatural wind swept across the plains, carrying the faint echoes of guttural chants and the rhythmic pounding of war drums. Scouts brought grim news. Sauron's armies, bolstered by Saruman's legions, were on the march. In the war room of Rohan's Golden Hall, The Avengers and the Fellowship gathered with King Theoden and his commanders. A large map of Middle-earth lay on the table, its surface marked with figurines representing the free peoples and the enemy forces. Theoden leaned over the map, his expression grim. Our scouts report tens of thousands of orcs marching from Isengard and Mordor, with siege engines in tow. They'll strike Helm's Deep within 2 days. Helm's Deep? Spider-Man asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. What's so special about it? It's an ancient stronghold, Aragorn explained, tracing a line on the map with his finger. A fortress built into the mountains, designed to withstand overwhelming forces. If we're to survive, we must hold it. Thor nodded, his expression resolute. Then we shall hold it. Let them come. Hulk grunted in agreement. Smash big armies. Easy. Gandalf, however, did not share their confidence. His sharp eyes turned to the glowing rift on the horizon, which flickered ominously like a second sun. Sauron's armies are not the only threat, he said. The rift grows larger with each passing hour. If it is not sealed, it will consume this world, and yours. Scarlet Witch stepped forward, her hands glowing faintly. I can feel it too. The rift is drawing power from both dimensions, feeding Sauron's strength. We can't fight an army and fix the rift at the same time, Sam said, his brow furrowed. We need a plan. The strategy session stretched late into the night. Aragorn, Theoden, and Gandalf discussed defensive measures, while the Avengers worked to adapt their abilities to Middle-earth's unique challenges. Sam Wilson, as the new Captain America, stepped naturally into a leadership role, rallying both the Fellowship and the Rohan soldiers. We need to play to our strengths, Sam said, his voice steady. Thor, Hulk, and I can focus on holding the line. Wanda, you work with Gandalf to stabilize the rift. Spider-Man, you and Legolas provide support from above. Banner, when you're not green, can you help with strategy? Bruce Banner adjusted his glasses. I can handle siege tactics, but if things go south, you'll want me in Hulk mode. The mention of siege tactics caught Gimli's attention. Bah, we don't need tactics, just a good axe and a strong wall. Spider-Man leaned toward him with a grin. And maybe a web or two. By dawn, the combined forces of Rohan, the Fellowship, and the Avengers were on the move. The journey to Helm's Deep was tense, with every rustle of leaves or distant howl setting nerves on edge. Thor walked at the front of the group, his broad shoulders a reassuring sight to the Rohan soldiers. Behind him, Aragorn and Sam discussed the intricacies of Middle-earth's warfare. These orcs, Sam asked, what's their weakness? Daylight, Aragorn replied, but the skies will darken when Sauron's forces arrive. Do not expect the sun to aid us. That's fine, Sam said, tightening his grip on his shield. We've fought in worse conditions. Thor grinned, tapping Mjolnir against his palm. And we have the thunder. As they neared Helm's Deep, the fortress came into view, its towering walls built into the mountainside. The sight was awe-inspiring, but it also carried an ominous weight. This was a place of last resort, a final line of defense against overwhelming odds. The Rohan soldiers moved quickly, fortifying the walls and preparing for the battle to come. Thor helped reinforce the gates with beams of steel, summoned by Mjolnir, while Scarlet Witch wove protective spells over the battlements. Spider-Man, ever resourceful, spun webbing across vulnerable points in the wall, creating makeshift reinforcements. Hulk, however, grew restless. Too much waiting, he grumbled, pacing near the fortress entrance. Hulk doesn't like waiting. Gimli chuckled, clapping the green giant on the shoulder. Patience, my friend. The fight will come soon enough. As night fell, the first sounds of the enemy army reached their ears. It was subtle at first. the faint clanging of weapons, and the guttural growls of orcs. But as the hours passed, the noise grew louder, more oppressive. By the time the first torches appeared on the horizon, the soldiers of Rohan were already in position, their weapons drawn. The Avengers stood on the battlements alongside the Fellowship, their faces grim. Thor raised Mjolnir, summoning a faint crackle of lightning in the darkened sky. "They will break against us like waves upon the shore," he said. Sam gripped his shield tightly, his gaze fixed on the approaching enemy. "We hold this line, no matter what." Gandalf and Scarlet Witch worked together at the back of the fortress, their combined magic focused on stabilizing the rift. The glowing tear in the seam pulsed with energy, its presence a constant reminder of the stakes. "It's growing faster than I anticipated," Gandalf said, his voice tense. "We must hurry." "I'm doing my best," Wanda replied, sweat beading on her forehead as she channeled her energies into the rift. "But it's fighting back." On the horizon, the enemy army finally emerged in full force. Orcs, trolls, and siege engines stretched as far as the eye could see, their torches illuminating the darkness like a sea of fire. At the head of the army stood a massive figure clad in black armor, wielding a great sword that radiated dark energy. It was a lieutenant of Sauron, his presence a chilling omen of the battle to come. The horn of Helm's Deep sounded, a deep, mournful note that echoed through the fortress. The Rohan soldiers braced themselves as the first wave of orcs charged toward the walls, their guttural cries filling the air. "Here they come," Spider-Man muttered, webbing his way to a higher vantage point. "This is gonna be fun." Thor raised Mjolnir, a bolt of lightning splitting the sky above him. "Avengers!" he bellowed, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "Assemble!" The clash of steel and the roar of magic marked the beginning of the battle. Thor leaped from the battlements, landing in the midst of the orc horde with a thunderous crash. Mjolnir spun in his hand, sending enemies flying with every strike. Sam flew overhead, his shield deflecting arrows as he swooped down to deliver precise blows to key targets. Spider-Man swung between the battlements, his webbing tripping orcs and immobilizing siege ladders. "This is way cooler than Queen's," he shouted, dodging an incoming arrow. Hulk barreled through the enemy ranks like a force of nature, his massive fists reducing trolls to rubble. Gimli fought alongside him, laughing heartily as they tore through the enemy together. "Now this is a battle," Gimli roared. On the walls, Aragorn and Legolas coordinated the defenses, their movements precise and unyielding. Scarlet Witch and Gandalf remained focused on the rift, their combined magic pushing back the dark energy that threatened to engulf them. But the enemy's numbers were overwhelming, and the battle was far from over. The first wave of Sauron's army crashed against the walls of Helm's Deep like a black tide, their roars and snarls filling the night. Orcs and Uruk-hai swarmed forward with siege ladders, their torches illuminating the battlefield in an eerie flickering light. Arrows rained down from the walls, cutting through the first ranks, but the enemy's numbers seemed endless. "Keep firing," Aragorn shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. He moved along the battlements, encouraging the soldiers of Rohan as they loosed arrow after arrow into the advancing horde. Legolas stood beside him, his bow a blur as he fired with unmatched precision. Every arrow found its mark, but even his skill could not stem the tide. Above them, Spider-Man swung from tower to tower, his webbing tangling the enemy's siege ladders before they could reach the walls. "Gotcha," he called out, yanking a ladder down with a well-placed strand. Orcs tumbled to the ground below, their howls of rage drowned out by the roar of the battle. "This is insane," Spider-Man muttered to himself as he dodged an arrow that whizzed past his head. Middle-earth does not mess around. Thor leaped into the fray below, his landing sending a shockwave through the enemy ranks. Orcs flew in every direction as Mjolnir spun in his hand, crackling with lightning. "Come forth, creatures of darkness," he bellowed, his voice echoing across the battlefield. "Face the might of Asgard." The orcs charged at him, their weapons glinting in the firelight. Thor met them head-on, his hammer swinging in wide arcs that sent enemies sprawling. A troll lumbered toward him, its massive club raised to strike. Thor grinned, raising Mjolnir high. "You'll regret that," he said, releasing a bolt of lightning that struck the troll square in the chest. It fell with a deafening crash, its body smoking. Nearby, Hulk barreled through the enemy ranks, his roars rivaling those of the Uruk-hai. He grabbed two orcs by the scruff of their necks and slammed them together like ragdolls. "Hulk smash," he roared, sending a group of enemies flying with a single punch. Gimli fought at his side, his axe cleaving through the enemy with brutal efficiency. "You fight well, Green One," Gimli shouted, laughing, as he chopped down another Uruk-hai. "But try to leave a few for me." Hulk glanced down at the dwarf, his massive fist still swinging. "Hulk doesn't share," he growled, though there was a hint of amusement in his tone. Above the battlefield, Sam Wilson soared through the air, his wings cutting through the darkness like a blade. He spotted a group of orcs attempting to breach the gates with a battering ram, and swooped down to intercept them. "Not on my watch," he muttered, throwing his shield with pinpoint accuracy. The vibranium disc struck the lead orc, sending it sprawling into its comrades. Sam landed in the midst of the group, his shield up as the orcs turned on him. He blocked their attacks with precision, countering with swift, decisive blows. One by one they fell, their weapons clattering to the ground. From his vantage point, Sam saw the full scale of the battle. The enemy's numbers were staggering, and for every wave they cut down, more seemed to rise to take their place. "We can't hold this forever," he muttered into his communicator. "What's the status on that rift?" Behind the walls, Scarlet Witch and Gandalf worked tirelessly to stabilize the growing rift. The glowing tear in the ski pulsed with dark energy, its edges crackling as if it were alive. Wanda's hands glowed red as she poured her magic into the rift, her face pale with concentration. Gandalf stood beside her, his staff raised, its light intertwining with her magic. "It resists our efforts," Gandalf said, his voice strained. "Sauron's influence strengthens it. If we do not succeed, it will tear this world apart." "I'm trying," Wanda said, through gritted teeth. Sweat dripped down her forehead as she pushed harder, her magic colliding with the rift's energy. "But it's fighting back. It's pulling me in." Gandalf turned to her, his expression grave. "Do not let it consume you. Focus on the light within you." Wanda closed her eyes, drawing on every ounce of strength she had. The rift's energy lashed out, sending a shockwave through the fortress that made the ground tremble. Soldiers stumbled, and even the Avengers felt the force of it. At the gates, the battering ram struck again, splintering the reinforced wood. Thor and Aragorn stood together, their weapons raised, as the enemy prepared to breach. "They'll break through any moment," Aragorn said, his voice grim. "Let them try," Thor replied, a dangerous gleam in his eye. "We shall meet them head-on." When the gates finally gave way, the orcs surged forward like a flood. Thor unleashed a blast of lightning that tore through their ranks, while Aragorn fought with unmatched skill, his sword flashing in the firelight. The two warriors stood their ground, their determination unwavering. Above them, Legolas fired arrow after arrow, his movements graceful and precise. Spider-Man joined him on the battlements, using his webbing to immobilize the orcs climbing the walls. "You're pretty good with that bow," Spider-Man said, glancing at Legolas. "And you are skilled with your web," Legolas replied, a faint hint of approval in his voice. "Thanks," Spider-Man said, grinning. "Teamwork, right?" As the battle raged on, Sauron's lieutenant entered the fray. The massive figure in black armor wielded a sword that radiated dark energy, cutting through the defenders with ease. His presence sent a chill through the air, and even Thor paused as the lieutenant approached. "You dare to stand against Sauron?" the lieutenant growled, his voice deep and menacing. Thor stepped forward, his grip on Mjolnir tightening. "I've faced gods and monsters," he said. "You're just another foe to be vanquished." The two clashed in a thunderous exchange, their weapons colliding with a force that shook the battlefield. Lightning crackled around Thor as he fought, his power matched blow for blow by the lieutenant's dark magic. On the walls, Sam rallied the soldiers of Rohan, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Hold the line," he shouted. "We can do this!" His words inspired the defenders, who fought with renewed vigor. Even as the enemy pressed harder, they refused to yield. Spider-Man swung down to join Sam, his quips lightening the mood despite the dire situation. "Hey, Cap," he said, landing beside him. "Think we're winning yet?" "Not even close," Sam replied, with a wry smile. "But we're holding." The battle continued late into the night, the defenders growing weary but resolute. Scarlet Witch and Gandalf finally managed to stabilize the rift, their combined magic forming a protective barrier around it. "It will not hold forever," Gandalf warned. "We must end this battle soon." "Then let's end it," Wanda said, her determination unwavering. The battle at Helm's Deep reached a fever pitch. The clash of steel and the cries of war echoed across the battlefield, as the defenders fought valiantly against Sauron's overwhelming forces. Every inch of the fortress was contested, the walls scarred by fire and blood. Though the Avengers and the Fellowship stood strong, the relentless tide of orcs threatened to engulf them. Thor stood at the gates, his armor scorched and dented, but his resolve unbroken. The massive lieutenant of Sauron loomed before him, dark energy radiating from his blade. "Your strength is admirable," the lieutenant sneered, "but even gods can fall." Thor's grip on Mjolnir tightened, his voice thunderous. "You will find Asgardian might far harder to break than your pitiful orc legions." Lightning crackled in the stormy skies above as Thor charged, his hammer glowing with divine energy. Their clash was monumental, each strike shaking the very ground. The lieutenant's blade radiated dark power, countering Thor's lightning in an explosion of light and shadow. Soldiers and orcs alike scattered from the sheer force of their battle. Despite his bravado, Thor could feel the weight of the lieutenant's blows. "Your strength comes from Sauron," Thor said through gritted teeth, "but I fight for something far greater." Inside the fortress, Sam Wilson led a desperate defense on the battlements. His shield deflected arrows and blades as he moved from one skirmish to the next, rallying the defenders. "Hold the line," he shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We're not giving up." Legolas fought beside him, his bow never ceasing, each arrow finding its mark. "Your resolve is impressive, Captain," Legolas said, his tone calm even in the heat of battle. "You lead as one born to it." Sam spared a brief nod. "And you shoot like a machine. Let's keep it up." Spider-Man swung above them, his webbing tying up siege ladders and tripping advancing orcs. Guys," he called out, landing on the wall beside Sam. "Not to be dramatic, but we're kinda running out of wall to defend here." Sam surveyed the battlefield, grim determination etched on his face. "Then we hold what's left. At the heart of the fortress, Scarlet Witch and Gandalf continued their battle against the rift. The tear in the sked pulsed with a malevolent energy, its edges crackling with dark magic. Wanda's hands glowed red as she poured her chaos magic into stabilizing the rift, beads of sweat rolling down her face. "It's still growing," she said, her voice strained. "I can't hold it back much longer." Gandalf's staff shone brightly as he joined her efforts, his deep voice steady despite the tension. "We must buy time. Sauron's forces are tied to this rift. If we can sever it, we weaken him." Wanda closed her eyes, focusing on the rift's chaotic energy. She felt its pull, a dark whisper at the edge of her consciousness. It tempted her, promising power and control. "It's trying to take me," she whispered. "Focus," Gandalf said firmly, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "You are stronger than it. Remember who you are." With a deep breath, Wanda redoubled her efforts, her magic intertwining with Gandalf's light. Together they pushed against the rift, forcing it to shrink ever so slightly. But the effort left her visibly shaken. "We're running out of time," she said. Meanwhile, Aragorn and Gimli fought their way to Thor, cutting through the orc horde to reach the embattled god. The lieutenant of Sauron stood before them, his blade raised for a killing blow. "Thor!" Aragorn shouted, throwing himself into the fray. His sword clashed against the lieutenant's dark blade, the force of the impact sending sparks flying. Thor stumbled back, his chest heaving. "This one is stronger than I anticipated." "Then we fight together," Aragorn said, his voice resolute. Gimli charged in, his axe swinging with brutal efficiency. "Leave the big one to me," he roared, striking the lieutenant's armored leg. The blow staggered the massive figure, creating an opening for Thor. With a mighty swing, Thor brought Mjolnir, crashing down on the lieutenant's sword, shattering it in a burst of light. The lieutenant howled in fury, his dark power dissipating as Thor's lightning surged through him. In moments, he crumbled to ash, his defeat rippling across the battlefield like a shockwave. Atop the walls, Legolas spotted something moving in the distance. A figure clad in black armor, wreathed in flames, emerged from the enemy's ranks. His very presence seemed to darken the world around him. "Sauron," Legolas whispered, his voice filled with dread. Sam turned to see the Dark Lord approaching. His shield felt suddenly heavy, but he steadied himself. "This is it," he said. "Everyone focus on him." The battlefield seemed to freeze as Sauron stepped forward. His voice boomed across the fortress, cold and unyielding. "You cannot stop me," he declared. "I am eternal. Your resistance is meaningless." Thor strode toward him, his eyes blazing with determination. "We've heard that before," he said, "and every time we prove them wrong." Sauron raised a massive mace, its dark energy radiating waves of oppressive power. Thor met him head-on, their clash shaking the very earth. The other Avengers joined the fight, each of them striking at Sauron with everything they had. Scarlet Witch unleashed a torrent of chaos magic, her red energy colliding with Sauron's darkness in a dazzling display. Despite their combined strength, Sauron proved nearly unstoppable. Every blow they landed seemed to fuel his power, his laughter echoing across the battlefield. "You fight well," he said mockingly, "but your strength is nothing compared to mine." Gandalf stepped forward, his staff glowing with a blinding light. "Strength alone will not defeat him," he said. "We must sever his connection to the rift." "Easier said than done," Spider-Man quipped, dodging a swing of Sauron's mace. "The guy's built like a tank." Realizing the rift was the key, Wanda focused all her energy on destabilizing it. Her magic flared brighter than ever, the strain evident on her face. "I need more time," she shouted. Thor and Sam worked together to distract Sauron, their combined attacks forcing him back. "Wanda," Sam called out. "We'll hold him. Just do it." With a final surge of power, Wanda tore through the rift's energy, severing its connection to Sauron. The Dark Lord staggered, his form flickering as the power sustaining him began to fade. "No," he roared, his voice filled with fury. "This is not the end." "It is for you," Thor said, raising Mjolnir. With one final strike, he unleashed a bolt of lightning that shattered Sauron's armor, reducing him to ash. The battlefield fell silent as the last of Sauron's forces retreated. The rift, now severed from his power, began to collapse in on itself. Wanda and Gandalf worked together to seal it, their combined magic finally closing the tear. As the first light of dawn broke over Helm's Deep, the defenders stood victorious. The fortress was battered, but the free peoples of Middle-earth had prevailed. Thor rested Mjolnir on his shoulder, his gaze sweeping across the battlefield. "A fine battle," he said, "but I prefer victory without so much mess." Sam nodded, his shield still in hand. "We did what we came to do. Now let's go home." The first rays of dawn broke over the battlefield, bathing Helm's Deep in golden light. The air was heavy with the aftermath of battle, the acrid scent of smoke, the low groans of the wounded, and the quiet shuffle of soldiers gathering their dead. Despite the destruction, there was a palpable sense of relief. Against all odds, they had prevailed. Thor stood atop the battlements, Mjolnir resting against his side. His armor was dented and soot smudged his face, but his expression was triumphant. "A hard-fought victory," he muttered, gazing out over the horizon. "Worthy of song." Nearby, Sam Wilson leaned against the stone wall, his shield still in hand. His breaths came heavy, and his uniform was torn, but he managed a small smile. "We held the line," he said, glancing at Thor. "That's all that matters." Spider-Man perched on a nearby ledge, his mask pulled halfway up as he munched on a piece of bread one of the Rohan soldiers had handed him. "So, what's the plan now? Because I'm thinking maybe a nap for like a week." Gimli and Legolas joined them, the dwarf's laughter breaking the quiet. "You fought well, young one," Gimli said, clapping Spider-Man on the back. "For someone with no axe, you're not half bad." Legolas nodded in agreement, his keen eyes scanning the battlefield. "Your methods are unorthodox, but effective." Inside the fortress, Scarlet Witch and Gandalf stood before the remnants of the rift. Though it had been sealed, faint traces of its energy lingered, crackling faintly in the air. Wanda wiped her brow, exhaustion evident in her posture. "It's done," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can still feel it, like it's watching us." Gandalf rested a hand on her shoulder, his expression calm. "The traces will fade with time," he said. "What you have done here will not be forgotten." Wanda looked down at her hands, her red magic still faintly flickering. "I didn't think I could hold it back. It felt like it was trying to consume me." Gandalf gave her a reassuring smile. "You stood against it and prevailed. That is no small feat. Power is neither good nor evil. It is the will behind it that defines its purpose. Remember that." As the morning wore on, the Avengers and the Fellowship gathered in the great hall of Helm's Deep. King Theoden stood at the head of the room, addressing his people. "This day will be remembered," he said, his voice steady despite the weariness etched into his face. "We stood together against the darkness, and we emerged victorious. Let this be a lesson to all. Even in the face of despair, hope prevails." The soldiers of Rohan cheered, their voices echoing through the hall. Theoden turned to the Avengers, his gaze filled with gratitude. "You are not of this world, yet you fought for us as if it were your own. For that, You will always have the thanks of Rohan. Sam stepped forward, his expression humble. We did what anyone would do. We couldn't just stand by. Thor grinned, placing a hand on Sam's shoulder. You speak well, Captain, but let us not forget who swung the hardest blows. Gimli chuckled, raising his mug. You'll find it was my axe that did the most damage, not that fancy hammer of yours. The room filled with laughter, the tension of the previous night easing as camaraderie took hold. Later, Aragorn pulled Sam aside, his voice low. You are a leader, Sam Wilson. Your people chose well when they gave you the shield of Captain America. Sam's expression grew serious. I've got a lot to learn, he admitted, but I'll do my best. That's all any of us can do, right? Aragorn nodded. True leadership comes not from strength, but from the willingness to shoulder the burdens of others. You have that. Spider-Man, overhearing the conversation, chimed in. Yeah, Cap's pretty great, but don't let him fool you. He still can't beat me at chess. Sam rolled his eyes. Don't make me ground you, kid. Thor sought out Gandalf, who stood on a balcony overlooking the plains. You carry the weight of wisdom well, wizard, Thor said. It is rare to see such strength paired with humility. Gandalf smiled faintly. And you carry the weight of your father's legacy. I see much of him in you. Thor's expression grew pensive. My father taught me to fight for what is right, but this world, it reminds me that even the gods can learn from mortals. Indeed, Gandalf said. The bonds we forge in times of trial often teach us more than any battle. As the sun began to set, the Avengers prepared to leave. Scarlet Witch and Gandalf worked together to reopen the rift, this time controlling its energy to create a portal that would take them home. Wanda's hands glowed red, while Gandalf's staff shone with white light, their combined magic stabilizing the passage. This is it, Sam said, turning to Aragorn. Thank you for everything. Aragorn clasped his arm. It is we who should thank you. Without your strength, Helm's Deep would have fallen. Spider-Man gave Legolas a mock salute. Don't miss me too much, Leggy. Legolas smirked faintly. I will not. Gimli, however, was less stoic. You'd best come back for another fight, Green Giant, he said, clapping Hulk on the arm. I've got a score to settle. Hulk grunted, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Hulk always wins. As the Avengers stepped through the portal, the Fellowship watched in silence. The rift shimmered and closed behind them, leaving the hall quiet once more. Gandalf turned to Aragorn, his voice thoughtful. They were strangers to this land, yet they fought as if it were their own. Aragorn nodded, a reminder that courage knows no borders. Back in their own world, the Avengers emerged in Avengers Tower, the familiar sights and sounds of Earth greeting them. For a moment, they stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The battles they had fought in Middle-earth had left their mark, not just on their bodies, but on their spirits. Thor broke the silence, raising Mjolnir. A fine adventure, he said, and a reminder that there is always more to learn. Sam smiled faintly, his gaze distant. They were good people, strong. They fought for each other. Spider-Man plopped onto a couch, letting out a long sigh. Okay, but seriously, next time, can we fight somewhere with pizza? Wanda sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. She could still feel the faint echoes of the rift, the pull of its dark energy. But she also felt something else. Hope. We made a difference, she said softly. That's what matters. As the team began to settle back into their world, Sam glanced out the window, the city lights twinkling below. His grip tightened on his shield as he thought of Aragorn's words. Leadership, he realized, wasn't about perfection. It was about trying, even when the odds were against you. "Let's get ready," he said, his voice steady. "Because no matter where we are, there's always another fight.